the podcast for potential development by and with Uli Vogel. A warm welcome to everyone, dear listeners, to our episode today, which I've been looking forward to for quite some time. It actually wasn't that easy to find a date for this either. Today, I have a wonderful guest here with me, Dr. Carlo Mackrodt, with whom I've been working together for many years now. Carlo, I'd like to give you a very warm welcome.
Uli, I also think it's absolutely great to have a chance to chat with you today, to look back on a few things we've done, and at the same time, maybe we can work out some helpful tips together, just to be more available for your clients and to ensure you're having a really good, meaningful conversation with them.
Lovely.
Thanks for your trust.
That's a nice intention, and that's exactly how we want to approach it. I've come up with a 3-step structure, so that our listeners can get to know you a little bit at the beginning. Then we'll actually dive into the business side of things. So, what's going on at the moment? Yeah, you've been a personnel consultant for almost 15 years now. What's the most exciting thing about it these days, and what do you really need to watch out for? And we agreed beforehand that we take a look at your CEO roundtables. You've developed a format there that I've honestly never seen before. And you've really pushed it forward over the past few years. I think our listeners might be interested in that as well. Let's start with you. A little profile, so to speak. You spent the entire decade from the 80s to the 90s deep in your studies. And it was all about engineering, industrial engineering, and then your doctorate. Of course, engineering was part of that too, at TU Munich, which I believe consistently ranks among the best, or at least the top 100 universities in the world. It really does rank that high. There are hardly any universities in Germany that are that good. Naturally, you also went into consulting after that. So you've been familiar with that from early on. Great firm, A.T., Kearney, and you even made it up to principal there. You had a few other stops along the way, but for quite a long time. You were also at Henkel, actually, as corporate vice president until 2010, and then you moved into executive search. We met each other at Rockesmummert. Now you're at Transsearch. And yes, what always sets you apart is your international experience. I always thought that was really, really great from the start. I think you speak 5 languages, depending on how rusty you are or not. It might even be a few more than that. You've also worked on different continents. Yeah, and now, to start off, I'm curious about your first why in life. Why does someone go into engineering? What was it for you, really? What was the reason you said, that's where I want to go, that's where I want to earn my stripes?
That depends on my background and what followed from it. Because I grew up in Italy, in Florence, just to give you some context. So that's really the origin of both my multilingualism and my intercultural perspective and attitude. When I came to Germany, I couldn't really speak proper German, and the only thing that helped me keep my head above water was math. And with that, I managed to get through elementary school, even though I wasn't all that good there. In high school, I did much better in all the technical subjects, that is, math, physics, chemistry, and then I worked my way up to advanced courses in physics and math, you could say. And I've always enjoyed tinkering with cars, and I noticed that in automobiles, in the drive systems, there's 2,000 years of mathematics built in. And I just wanted to research that more closely and actually build something like that myself one day. My goal was always to become a designer. So it was just a logical step to study mechanical engineering, and not electrical engineering. I really enjoyed tinkering.
And that you can actually see something moving, something happening.
That something moves, and that you can actually repair something and understand what you're doing. For me, it was fascinating. This thing, a car, mobile, without a horse, and that you could get it running. I mean, what? Was invented over 100 years ago, I found that really, really exciting and a real benefit for us as humanity. That was actually the foundation of mobility.
You really can't, or shouldn't, underestimate that, in my opinion. Now we've just experienced another leap in innovation, especially when it comes to artificial intelligence. But mobility is truly one of the cornerstones of human development. I'm totally with you on that. So, the leap in innovation in individual mobility is exactly what you meant there. And in my opinion, you really can't overestimate that either. You've definitely caught up when it comes to learning German. You can tell. There was nothing left, and you can kind of hear the influence from my hometown too. And then you also went into consulting. After you worked for a systems house for a while, I think. The boss there was also Karl Pieringer, whom I spoke to recently, and you know him. I think you know each other from there as well, so what was it that made you decide to go there? What was it? What was the reason for you?
Yeah, maybe I need to go back a bit, because during my mechanical engineering studies, I learned through friends that design isn't really the main thing, but rather how to actually manufacture the products you've designed. And in fact, during my main studies, I didn't focus on design, but rather on operations and manufacturing technology, and through that I discovered economic connections that you normally don't get taught. Because in mechanical engineering in Germany, you learn how to design golden door handles, but not what the market actually wants. And that's what led me, when I was offered the opportunity to do my doctorate at the Chair of Materials and Processing Sciences, to also, at the same time, back then in Munich, this was possible, pursue a postgraduate business administration program for engineers to become a certified industrial engineer. And so, that was a logical step. Since I come from a non-entrepreneurial family, my father worked in middle management. I simply wanted to see, experience, and learn how to run a business. And that's when Connie was recommended to me as one of the few truly hands-on companies, top management consultancies, global top management consultancies. That is exactly where I had always wanted to go as well, primarily because I truly see myself as an international professional. Perhaps we will have the chance to get into that a bit more later on, but that is precisely why I chose to start there. In order to learn the essential skills of how to effectively lead, carefully structure, and successfully move a large company forward into the future. So, it was a logical step to gain a broad perspective.
Well, and in these big consulting firms, it's also the case that you really get into the details. You actually pick up a lot as well. The projects are definitely very, very demanding, and of course there are also those stories of moving up the ranks. Did you make it to principal there, or is that where you ended up? And then, often the question comes up, once you reach a certain, let's say, level of maturity, that many people in consulting start to think, now I want to switch sides, now I want to try something different. Was that part of the reason for you? That you then moved into the business world yourself?
That's a great question, of course. When you get older and you're away 5 days a week, you start to think about things. When it comes to work and family, by the time you're 38, you've already sown your wild oats. After 9 years, I was always very quick in my life to take a look at things. Switching to the other side, at some point, when you're 40, you end up stuck in consulting, and I got the chance to work intensively on many transformation projects, especially in procurement. Back then, we started the first auction platforms. I got the opportunity to start as a board member at DCI, Database for Commerce and Industry AG. There, I was the divisional board member for business development and technology. And yes, we went public with the company. That meant I could apply everything I learned at Connie directly, one-to-one. And that was honestly brilliant. Until the bubble burst, and my last client from Connie, the only one who wasn't in tech, which was Henkel in Dusseldorf, the board there asked me if, in these tough times after the bubble, I wouldn't prefer to join a real company. And to be honest, what really moved me, and this is something we keep talking about, was the topic of company culture. Because Henkel was a company where I worked as a consultant for 2 years. There, I noticed that people felt like part of the Henkel family, and that many fresh, young employees, both men and women, joined because they wanted to work for a family-owned business. I hadn't experienced anything like that at Connie, not at all. And that's when I first realized that, alongside expertise, technology, great work, and exciting tasks, the way people interact and the sense of togetherness, when it comes to culture and leadership, are absolutely crucial for whether someone stays at a company. And that really drew me into the company. I am not entirely certain if the specific detail is relevant for the scope of this podcast, but it is worth noting that when Conrad Henkel passed away, the outpouring of grief was so immense that lines of people stretched on for blocks, with mourners waiting patiently to pay their final respects for an entire week at his place of repose. I could never have imagined something like that before. And that's when I realized how important it is to be part of an organization where people work together towards a common goal. And that really stuck with me. That was also one of the reasons why, After 9 years at Henkel in various roles, I was in Sweden, in Stockholm, then worked in finance and later in the adhesives division with different responsibilities. At a certain point, I decided that I wanted to turn my hobby, my passion for people, into my profession, and that's why I moved into executive search. Parentheses open, and not Uli into HR consulting, parentheses close.
That's still how people often say it in Germany. It's a bit, well, kind of old-fashioned. 10. But I still prefer it over saying headhunter. I really don't like that at all. But executive search is, of course, the correct term because that's exactly the field you're working in. I think a lot of people call themselves that, even though they might not actually be. We've known each other for such a long time now. I know what your mandates are, and they really are up there at the top. And of course, it's always a huge pleasure working with you. Again, there's that international aspect. I think last year we had something with India. But it doesn't matter. If something comes up with Austria, that's great too. So basically, we do all sorts of different things together. But in the end, it's always about people's values and the culture of the companies. And that's why I think it's incredibly important to bring in your wealth of experience, but also your professionalism, here together. Is there some kind of special formula where you'd say, yes, I've turned my passion for people into my profession, where you'd say, and this brings us to our second part, your business, what is especially important in executive search?
Well, that's actually one of the reasons we work together, and why I value profiling values so much. You just mentioned India and the topic of culture and personality. It's absolutely crucial that employees join a company for the right reasons. Because of the job itself. They find it exciting, but they stay because of the supervisor and the company culture. Because of the company's leadership style, and the real skill is to get a really good feeling for that. It's not always about finding the best candidate on paper, the one with the best CV, but rather the one who's the best fit. Specifically, someone with the potential to take on certain tasks, not just here and now, today. Not for a position as it's described today, but for how we'll need it tomorrow or the day after, that you find someone with the imagination, or with the vision, who also fits culturally, and sometimes even matches the company's pace. Some companies move very, very quickly, so you need someone who's plug and play. Other companies say, no, we give everyone time so that they can settle in, be welcomed into the company, and then really get started. Secondly, in my view, this is the more sustainable situation and perspective for candidates who are starting somewhere new. Because joining a new company is like an organ transplant. The blood type has to match, and that's something we pay close attention to. And that's where profiling values really helps us a lot. It's not just about expertise. I'm confident I can handle that myself. But to counterbalance that with willpower, with these delicate questions that need to be put in a certain order, those famous 18. I always find that really brilliant. May I express my thanks and respect to you. I also recommend, whenever possible, not all clients want this, but I do recommend to clients the other option as well. If you have assessment methods like Hogan or DISC or something else, I'd say, just give it a try. Profiling values. By now, I've also had some pretty good experiences, and those work too.
Yes, thank you very much for that as well. Unfortunately, not everyone is on board, but you can't have everyone. No, but it's like you said, you just have to bring together the different areas of expertise. And you bring the professional expertise, but not just that, you've also got your own experience. You've sat in those leadership positions yourself. That means you understand what this kind of management or this kind of leadership is about. And for many years now, you've been bringing that experience into play yourself when you select people for companies. Is it the case that, because I know you often work with the same clients, that you have long-standing client relationships, and that you also choose your clients over time based on certain criteria? I mean, as a consultant, there's that old saying, well, in the end, okay, you always end up with the clients you deserve. But you can look at that in a positive way, too. How was it for you? Which direction did you go in? And now, after almost 14 or 15 years, where would you say your main client market is?
Well, I'll take what you just said as a compliment. At the beginning, you really can't choose your clients. But what I've simply learned is, I truly find a great deal of professional satisfaction working with clients who are deeply reflective, who approach their decisions with deep and careful consideration, not in an authoritarian or demanding way, but more like skilled conductors, guiding and mentoring their team members to help them perform at their absolute best. And in the end, it's not just about simply delegating the weight of responsibility, but also ensuring they have the full authority to go along with it. Responsibility and authority always need to be well balanced and appropriate. And that's something a lot of business owners forget. And that's why it's very, very important to me. Maybe it's also a case of every pot has its lid, that we work with companies who aren't just looking to fill a position quickly, but who want to develop a long-term strategy. That's where I can step in as a leadership advisor, helping to figure out, where are we today? What are the goals? Starting from the vision, thinking about the mission, the objectives, the strategy, does it all make sense? For what reason do I actually want to find someone? And the other thing is to ask, what is the culture like? What are the values? What rules do people work by? So, the topic here is culture. I've already mentioned culture and values. Do people actually want to work there? So, not just in terms of the job itself, but within the company context. How people interact with each other. And that really, really increases the chances, not just of attracting employees, but of keeping the best ones. And our motto is, keep the best and attract the rest. Especially now, when so many people are being sought after. With the markets being so empty, and some companies unable to grow because they can't find the right people at any level, it's absolutely crucial to simply ask people, why are you here? And the last thing, of course, is to empower people. As I just mentioned, the third point is simply about having a clear structure, an organization that I need to understand, to be able to say, what will the organization look like the day after tomorrow, and how does that fit with the vision and purpose? And then to ask, what responsibilities do you give to people? And especially, what competencies do you give them so that they're actually allowed to do what you assign to them as tasks? How often are people actually given responsibility? And then the rug is pulled out from under their feet because they're not actually allowed to do it, or there's constant interference. And that's really the opportunity where leaders act as conductors, not wanting to play first violin themselves, but letting others play first violin. That's incredibly hard for people who move up the hierarchy and still love to be hands-on. It's simply a different kind of work, and the real skill is deciding who are truly the leaders who want to help people grow. And the topics, the strategies, the ideas are there, but then you have people under you, beside you, and even above you, who fill that space. And that's something I've learned over time. Yeah, I think you just asked which companies, when companies really value that. And that's how you have to see it. You end up exactly there, and you're not just filling a position, but you're actually creating added value for the future. And then there are the companies where I might be looking in India one time, then in Latin America, then the person from Latin America is transferred to Asia, and then I look for someone in India or China. And then you become part of the organism. Business leaders, to help shape the best, to find and promote the best people. Then you're basically an advisor.
Yeah, and you're also really close and you accompany them over a longer period of time. That means you also develop a completely different expertise, a whole new understanding. You've now beautifully used the metaphor of the conductor, or, if you like, the orchestra, twice already, and just now as well. I think that's incredibly important, because if we imagine how harmonious a great orchestra can sound when playing together, and what role is involved there. That's the conductor's job. At your current employer in executive search, I've always been interested in the orchestra method, and John Burdett, who I believe is also partly responsible for it at your company. He was actually in Germany recently. I've also listened to a few of his webinars before. So, I'm a fan of his. He's kind of, maybe a bit of an advisor for you as well, if you put it that way. How would you describe his role at TransSearch?
John Burdett is the thought leader behind the orchestra method. In my view, he's now truly, well, I don't know if I'd call him a visionary. Actually, he is a visionary. Where? And how to get companies into harmony. He was, maybe not many people know this, head of HR at General Electric under Jack Welch, and held various roles worldwide. HR. And in the end, he was Sergio Marchionne's coach at Fiat until he sadly passed away. And he's someone who simply thinks about how to. Getting the right, not just the best, but the right people into roles where they can really make a difference. And he's at all our events, everywhere we're thinking about today, tomorrow, and the day after, he's always involved. And he's also someone who gives me really strong support when I hold my roundtables. So, I've been running C-level roundtables since COVID to reflect on things. What do the better business leaders do differently from the average ones? And it always comes back to the topic. What do they do? What's the culture like? What's leadership like? How are people chosen? And how do you keep people in the company? Because that's becoming more and more of a strategic weapon. Of course, technology and all that is very, very important, but you should assume that all the companies in the market are really good at it. What sets them apart is something else. How do they work together? And that's when a lot of my clients say, yeah, in football it would be the strikers and so on. And I say, yeah, that's all well and good, but do you know the America's Cup? Can you imagine what it's like when you're sailing there? And there, everyone has their role and everyone has to go the extra mile. And everyone has to make the most of every bit of wind and strategy, like how you tack. You have to work as a team. If one person isn't pulling their weight, you fall behind. And I think that's how high-performing companies are successful today. And I believe the best ones, those are really like elite athletes working together as a team. So, every tennis player is great, every football player too, don't get me wrong. That's important as well. But for me, it really stands out in the America's Cup when a crew has to stick together through thick and thin. Where you always have competition. There's always competition. You can never let up. If you find people who actually enjoy that. That's what makes the difference.
Uli. To master these forces of nature together as a team, I know that sailing is also something you personally really enjoy. You've already sailed in the Canary Islands, too. A few years ago, you even traveled there for that. But I also think it's a really fitting metaphor, just like earlier when you mentioned the orchestra. And again, you mentioned it twice, it's about the question of fit, and not just. It's not about who's the best here or there, but rather about how things fit together. And that's why this organism shouldn't be seen as a technocratic structure or a construction kit, but rather as a living being, the company itself, which needs to be nurtured. You really have to think carefully about what you want things to look like in a few years, and what you need to set in motion now. That came across really well. You've managed to get that across a few times now. Having this future-oriented mindset is important here, and it's not about just fixing something. We have to steer things towards the future, and that can't be done in a rush. I believe that, especially in executive search, those who work closely with companies will increasingly come out on top. Of course, companies have to be open to that as well. I can imagine that it's more difficult for large corporations than for medium-sized companies. Here in Germany, we have a lot of hidden champions, and you're someone who really knows your way around with them. We've already worked together on one thing or another in that area. So I think it's about rethinking things here and approaching it more organically, using good metaphors like the ones you've shared. Let me come back to the CEO roundtables that you initiated since COVID. I've had the chance to take part twice already. What made you start them? And maybe you could explain a bit to our listeners how it all works, and especially, what I thought was fantastic, what you actually provide afterwards once you've analyzed everything. I think it's definitely worth discussing this here again.
I'm glad you're enjoying it. Actually, it came about from an idea during the COVID period, so we kept. We discussed things with top companies, did interviews, and so on. But we simply realized that at TransSearch, with 60 offices in 40 countries and a total of 660 employees, we are very, very close to internationally operating companies. Especially companies from Germany, which are increasingly pushing abroad due to growth and opportunities overseas. Or striving to do so. There. Especially during COVID, there were a lot of Obstacles, difficulties, and challenges for companies. That was the topic. Supply chain issues, chip shortages, and rising energy prices. It was a multi-crisis, a pandemic crisis, as someone once told me. And then all the employees were gone as well. And there were deadlines to carry out SAP release changes. With planned town hall meetings of 200 people, for example in Shanghai, which one of my clients wanted to hold. And then, suddenly, just 2 days before, the message came from the government, everything's cancelled, everyone has to work from home, and it was forbidden. It was a live experiment, something no one could have ever imagined would work. The CIO called me afterwards, Mr. Mackrodt, and it worked, you can't even imagine it. No one believed it would. And I think that was a real eye-opener. Oh, we can change processes too. The thing is, now it affects everyone, and whoever doesn't get on board quickly enough will fall behind. And that's when the idea came up, what are leading companies doing? What are the medium-sized shareholders, company, or family owners doing to steer their money, their business, into safe harbor? Is there any way to do that? And the opportunity was for TransSearch, with this large client base, to simply provide the platform to bring clients together. So our idea was, not to brag, but unlike many of our competitors, to avoid big meetings with just one person talking and 200 participants listening. We said, we want a discussion. And the goal was to have 8 roundtables, each with between 8 and 12 participants, who would exchange ideas on specific topics. We asked, how did you experience the crisis? What are the keys to success? How did you find working from home? Where are the limits of working from home? Do you have a 2030 agenda, or what are you doing? And it just kept evolving from there. Since 2020, we've held these roundtables with surveys every year, specifically with these conversations, where in total, without wanting to brag too much, I have to say, I'm very proud that the lowest number of participants was 78. At one of these roundtable sessions, we even had 94 participants. There were always 4 of them. Sorry, there were always 8 of them. 4 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon, always on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And everyone could choose which time worked for them. That determined the group of participants as well. It had to be C-level, but the participants were chosen at random. We didn't control anything, and that was the feedback we got. People loved that a CFO could put their heads together with a CIO or a CEO and talk about certain topics. So, different disciplines at the top level had conversations about why they approach certain things the way they do. And we asked questions that had been coordinated with our clients in advance to see if they were actually interesting. And in the end, it turned out, yes, they were interesting. Everyone participated, and that's why, together with my team, we summarized the results, we did live streams, then put everything together both graphically and quantitatively. It was only semi-empirical. So, except for 2020, when we did a study with 370 participants, after that we worked in a semi-empirical way. We basically collected responses using tally sheets, tracking who answered which questions and how. We systematized and summarized all of that. And as you know, we then sent it out to the participants. And apparently it was so good that Professor Wildman approached me about it to ask me for something like that. Also, at the Munich Management Colloquium, a conference with up to 800 top executives, I was invited to give a talk, not always about. Like at TU Munich, my alma mater, where it's always about higher, faster, further, but rather, how do you actually get people to take action? What really makes a company successful? It's energy. And how do you actually build up energy? Or if the energy falls asleep and freezes up, how do you thaw it out, like a pot or a kettle on the stove? How do you not only melt frozen water, but sometimes even make it evaporate? To steam, not horse steam.
To steam, exactly. And it was a great atmosphere, also because I got to be there twice myself. People went in with a really open mindset, and it was also very international. And you get the feeling, and maybe that's also because of you as a person, Carlo, that there's a protected, yet open space here where you can really exchange ideas well, without having to be overly cautious, and the questions were well prepared as well. But that's really just important as a way to spark things. What really matters is what comes out of such a discussion. And I have to say, I really, really enjoyed it, and I can imagine that, of course, if you did all 8, I'm guessing you moderated all of them. And so, you get a completely different understanding from that. But especially being able to condense all of that and present it to the participants in a good format afterwards, I actually found that incredibly valuable, and I hope you keep going with it, Carlo. How's that looking?
Well, first of all, like you said, since I was present everywhere, I was sometimes able to bring insights from other roundtables into the discussion. Like, for example, 2 points that really stuck with me. A, it was about working from home. And it's also about relationships. You can't build relationships when everyone is working remotely from home. And one of the participants once said, relationships need to be recharged like batteries. So, I'm far from saying that we all need to work from home. I make much more of a distinction between relational and transactional processes. Finance and IT can be handled in a very transactional way and from home. Relational sales and production, though, sometimes need to be on site, but you do need to see each other from time to time. And then you can go back to working from home or being at the office. And production managers who were responsible for 50 plants, they used to only see about 10 plants a year, and they were always traveling. And now they say that they can benchmark all 50 plants, or however many they have, once a month, depending on how they're structured. That has huge advantages, much more efficiency and effectiveness. And that's the great thing about it. And someone once told me something else that I really liked. The crystallization point of culture is the place itself.
That's a nice term, Carlo, bringing in the relational aspect here. That's exactly what we need to work on. It's the relationships that really define people. And when those are good, companies also become successful organisms. So, in that sense, I found the insights you shared with our listeners today really valuable. Your humanity really came through, and there was something organic about it as well. I'll bring up the orchestra metaphor again, but also the sailing metaphor at this point. And I think those are things you should keep in mind when it comes to recruiting and searching for staff. And that's exactly where you bring a lot of experience to the table. And you've turned your hobby into your profession. With people. Carlo, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your insights. And you have the final word. Go ahead.
Yes, one thing, maybe we shouldn't forget, with everything we discussed just now. And that is, when I'm searching now, I try to work out with my clients, what is the purpose and mission of the company? So not, what's the vision and when do we want to be number one? Everyone wants that. But maybe it's also about saying, we're working on something for people, something meaningful in a foundation. And a lot of companies don't give that enough thought.
I think you summed it up perfectly, Carlo. That's exactly what people can get passionate about. So in that sense, I think it's great to bring up that example here as well. Thank you very much. That was my closing remark. Nothing more can top that. Carlo, we'll talk again soon. Thanks for joining us. Ciao.
My pleasure. Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Ciao.